and sought dates with teenage girls, 16 to 19-year-old girls. All right, now, as I've told you folks on the show before, my position on this has always been that it wasn't illegal for him to do that. So if a 30-year-old man wants to go out with a 17-year-old girl, that's his prerogative. There's nothing illegal about that, certainly in Alabama with the laws and age of consent at 16. And especially since these teenage girls, these other ones, they don't allege any kind of sexual behavior on his part or impropriety at all. That's certainly not a reason to say he can't serve in the Senate. He's a 70-year-old man right now. This is back when he was 30, 31, 32 years old. But it does seem creepy. And there's just something that seems grossly inappropriate about a 30-year-old man dating a 16 or 17 or 18-year-old girl. Okay? Nolte points out something that is a really fair point to bring up that I never really thought about before, and it's making me wonder if I'm being a little bit, I don't know, pharisaical or judgmental about the idea of a 30-year-old man dating a teenager. Let me explain. For me, I can't, I mean, that just seems so wrong. Okay, it just does. It may be legal, but it seems wrong. But as Nolte points out, in many of the places in the South, it's actually common in the South, and especially back in the 1970s and 1980s, it was extremely common in the South for older men, to look for a wife really young, to basically look for potential wife prospects that were in their teens. Look for somebody 16, 17, 18 years old as possibly a potential future wife. That was actually very common as part of Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia and such, that kind of culture. And it wasn't even considered, not only was it not illegal, it wasn't even considered inappropriate in many cases. And so, and it got me thinking a little bit about this, because we do have a tendency sometimes to look at things through our own lens and our own culture and our own time, and we don't realize the way that people look at things differently in different cultures or during different times. And in the South in the 1970s, it was a very common thing for people to look for potential wives when they were in their teens, even if somebody themselves was in their 30s. So it wasn't really that out of the mainstream for him to do that. Does that mean everybody did? No. But it wasn't considered that much out of the mainstream, and at no time when he was running for public office was this any kind of controversial. As I said before, people even said that worked with him in the DA's office, they knew it was, quote-unquote, common knowledge that when he was 30 years old, he would sometimes date, of all the different ages of women that he dated, he would date some that were as young as in their teenage years, their late teenage years, but still. That was considered common knowledge. Yet that in no way caused him any kind of controversy or any kind of problems with voters or anybody else in Alabama at the time. And then it got me thinking about this episode of MASH that remember the TV show MASH? Really political, pushing the left-wing agenda, but there were some funny scenes in MASH. But anyway, I was watching this episode of MASH, and I noticed something, and it's an episode that I'd seen before, and I never thought about this before until now, and I watched this episode, and I go, oh my goodness. Okay, here's what happened. It's the episode, for those of you that have seen the MASH episodes, you'll know the one I'm talking about. Remember, you got Hawkeye Pierce, of course, Alan Alda. He was there through the whole series. But partway through the series, his cohort, his partner, was Wayne Rogers, the actor who played Trapper John, MD. Okay. Well, he left the show, and then he was replaced by the actor, Will Ferrell. Mike Farrell. Mike Farrell took over to play B.J. Honeycutt. Okay. This episode that I saw, it was the very first episode of B.J. Honeycutt. So it was the first episode of the new season. And this aired in 1975. So again, this is during the 70s. And Hawkeye Pierce, Alan Alda, he's meeting his new partner, B.J. Honeycutt. And as the two of them are talking, and BJ's like, yeah, I just got here, just got to Korea, just got the notice that and he was a doctor serving, back home or whatever, and so he's got to come to Korea. And BJ says to Hawkeye, yeah, he says, I was getting ready I was at home, and my wife and I were going out, and our babysitter, Norma Jean, was over. And then Hawkeye, who's known in this series to be kind of a womanizer and a flirt and all that kind of stuff, he goes, babysitter Norma Jean? And you could see he was conveying with his eyes a message of, oh, wow, that's my kind of gal, a teenager, right? A babysitter teenager named Norma Jean. And so Hawkeye says to BJ, wait, let me guess. She's 18, right? So Hawkeye, his character, which, by the way, Alan Alda, I looked it up, I was curious. Alan Alda was 40 years old when he filmed this, okay? But it wasn't considered controversial when this aired in 1975 for a 40-year-old man to be saying, oh, wow, yeah, that sounds like somebody that would be interesting to me. Let me guess, was she 18? As though that would be a positive thing. And then BJ says to Hawkeye, no, she's 15. And then Hawkeye, instead of going, ooh, whoa, no, that's too young, Hawkeye's eyes lit up, and he went, ooh, like, in other words, like, that's even better. So, let me guess, 18, no, 15, ooh, like, ooh, wow, that's even better. So, 15 was more attractive to Hawkeye. He was more interested in her at 15 than he was at 18, which he was just hoping that she was. Now, again, I know this is MASH. I know it's a TV show. I know it's all fake. I mean, I understand that. But the point here is there was nothing controversial in what the writers were putting out in this MASH episode, that here's Hawkeye, a 40-year-old man. Oh, wow, yeah, 18-year-old girl, that sounds pretty interesting. Ooh, 15, even better. That wasn't considered controversial in 1975 for the TV show MASH. There were no complaints or anything. Wow, what is he doing? What is a 40-year-old man talking about, fantasizing about dating a teenager for? And so with that said, I got to now put into perspective, I'm taking a second look at the point that Nolte is making here. That back in the 1970s, especially in the South, that wasn't considered a controversial thing for a 30-year-old man to want to find a potential wife starting really young, like in late teenage years. And so, yeah, for me today, I mean, it still seems creepy, but I don't want to be so judgmental and pharisaical as to say, therefore, it has to be creepy for everybody in all circumstances for all times. So let me just read to you a little bit of what Nolte says in his piece regarding this, all right? Because here's the spin that he puts on it. He says, quote, when my wife and I met, she was 36 and I was 19. We started dating the following year and have now been together 31 years. I pursued her, by the way, relentlessly. Therefore, I'm a bit of a hypocrite when I say that the instinct to be uncomfortable with the idea of a 30-year-old man dating a 16 or 17-year-old girl is a good one. I share that discomfort. So in other words, he's saying, I also think it's creepy and unseemly and inappropriate for a 30-year-old man to be dating a 17-year-old girl. He goes, but I admit I'm kind of a hypocrite here because, yeah, I was a teenager when I first started wanting to, date who's now my wife, but she was 36 at the time. Anyway, he goes on. Nevertheless, the age of consent in Alabama is and was 16. That is a decision that the people of Alabama have made, which means that even if Roy Moore did seek to date girls as young as 16, there was nothing illegal about that. But more importantly is the fact that 40 years ago in the South, the idea of a 30-year-old man looking for a much younger wife was not at all uncommon. In other words, this behavior was not only legal, it wasn't even considered inappropriate. It wasn't a violation of social mores. He goes on to say, the first 27 years of my life were spent in the small towns and inner cities of the Midwest. Since then, I have lived 10 years in Los Angeles and 15 years in the South. Along with my wife's Mexican heritage, this exposure to all kinds of people has taught me that good and decent Americans can have slightly different mores. And the difference in the case of Moore's alleged dating habits is really slight, because if these girls were just 2 or 3 years older, no one would even be talking about them today. On top of that, and this is where I finally begin to engage in that awesome sport of whataboutism, on top of that, to be lectured by Democrats and media elites on this issue is beyond laughable. This legion of, he says, freaks, feigning moral horror over a 30-year-old man legally dating a 16-year-old girl is the height of partisanship. Never forget that these are the same people on the left who are okay with 7-year-olds choosing and changing their gender, kindergartners losing their innocence by way of lessons about homosexuality, instructions in Teen Vogue magazine about graphic different types of sexual behaviors, and 12-year-old girls being exposed to naked men in the showers because those men think of themselves as women. So please spare me your outrage. Then he goes on to say, excuse me for speaking a hard truth, but all victims should not automatically be believed. Yes, they should be taken seriously, but then their actions must be fully and fairly investigated. As with all things when it comes to Roy Moore, our blazingly dishonest media are not seeking to inform or illuminate. Rather, they're just using the Moore scandal as yet another weapon in a highly partisan campaign of emotional blackmail meant to define just who is and who is not a good person. Just as the media do with guns, abortion, homosexuality, Obamacare, and Trump, all of their coverage is geared toward pressuring you to agree with them, because if you don't agree with them, that means you're an indecent and immoral person. Well, sorry to disappoint my media friends, but good Americans do not destroy an entire person over decades-old, hotly disputed allegations released just in time to sway a crucial election, especially when those allegations don't stand up to a reasonable fact check. Now, more facts may become known, and I reserve the right to change my mind. But as of right now, there is not enough evidence to justify the annihilation of a fellow human being. And you know what? I think he makes a fair point. I really do. So let me just say, on the thing about dating teens, all right, don't email me saying, Bob, I can't believe you think it's perfectly fine for a 30-year-old to date teenagers. All right. If you send me that email, you're just going to be exposing to me how you don't actually listen to the words I speak. I didn't say that I think it's okay. I said that I think it's creepy, unseemly, and inappropriate, and I still do. What I said was, I think Nolte makes a very fair point when he says, let me remind everybody of something. 40 years ago, in the Deep South, it was actually considered common for 30-something-year-old men to look for wives potentially very young. Look for women that are very young, not do anything sexual with them, but look for them young, like 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, somewhere in that area, and have a 10, 12, 13-year age difference. That was not uncommon at all 40 years ago in the South. And it wasn't even considered inappropriate or controversial because it was, quote, common knowledge that when he was 30, he dated 20-year-olds, but he also, in some cases, dated girls in their late teens, and it didn't affect him in the elections. There was no controversy surrounding that. That wasn't considered unseemly. And so we got to remember, in the Deep South 40 years ago, that was actually fairly common. And with that said, I have to be careful not to be a Pharisee about this and go, just because in 2017, me personally, consider it creepy for a 30-year-old man to date a 16 or 17 or 18 or 19-year-old. I can't assume that everybody considered that creepy in the Deep South 40 years ago. So that's all I'm saying in examining the claims that Nolte makes. And I think there's some very fair points there. Okay? All right.